On a warm spring morning in rural Tennessee, a young woman vanished from her home without a trace. There were no signs of struggle, no witnesses, no body, just an empty house, a crying infant, and a husband whose story would unravel thread by thread over the course of 16 years. Her name was Jennifer Leigh Thompson. She was 23 years old, and on April 14, 2009, she disappeared from the face of the earth. The question that would haunt investigators, family members, and an entire community for more than a decade was deceptively simple. Where was Jennifer Thompson, and who was responsible for her vanishing? Carroll County sits in the western corner of Tennessee, a patchwork of farmland and forest where the towns are small and the roads stretch long between neighbors. Huntingdon, the county seat, holds fewer than 4,000 souls. It is the kind of place where people know each other's business, where church on Sunday is a given, where a missing person is not just a statistic but a daughter, a sister, a friend. The landscape rolls gently, dotted with tobacco barns and modest homes set back from two-lane highways. In 2009, the economic recession had settled over the region like morning fog, clinging to job prospects and family budgets alike. Jennifer Leigh Thompson had grown up in these parts. Born Jennifer Leigh Patterson on August 12, 1985, she was the middle child of Robert and Diane Patterson, raised in a brick ranch house on the outskirts of town. Those who knew her said she was quiet, prone to keeping her thoughts close. She had graduated from Huntingdon High School in 2003, worked briefly at the local Dollar General, and married Christopher Dale Thompson in a small ceremony at the First Baptist Church in November 2006. She was 19. He was 24. Christopher worked construction when work was available, driving to job sites across the county in a faded blue Chevrolet pickup. The couple rented a single-story house on County Road 170, a narrow strip of cracked asphalt that wound through fields of soybeans and stands of pine. The house was small, white with green shutters, set 30 yards back from the road. A gravel driveway curved up to the front porch. There was a swing set in the yard, though it had begun to rust. In February 2008, Jennifer gave birth to their daughter, Emma Grace Thompson. The infant had her mother's dark hair and her father's blue eyes. April 14, 2009, began like any other Tuesday. The temperature had climbed into the low 70s by mid-morning. A light breeze moved through the pines. Jennifer had fed Emma her bottle at 6:30, changed her diaper, and laid her down for her morning nap. Christopher left for work at 7:15, driving toward a job site in Mackenzie, some 20 miles north. He told investigators later that Jennifer had been wearing a gray t-shirt and blue jeans when he kissed her goodbye. She had been standing in the kitchen, he said, washing a coffee mug in the sink. Clears throat. The last confirmed sighting of Jennifer Thompson came at 8:45 that morning. A postal carrier named Gerald Whitfield delivered mail to the County Road 170 address and saw Jennifer through the front window, holding Emma in her arms. He waved. She waved back. He placed the mail in the box at the end of the driveway and continued his route. At 9:30, Jennifer's mother, Diane Patterson, called the house phone. There was no answer. She tried again at 10. Again, no answer. This was unusual. Jennifer always answered her mother's calls, especially in the morning when Emma was awake. At 11:15, Diane drove to the house herself. It was a 12-minute drive from her own home. When she pulled into the gravel driveway, she noticed immediately that Christopher's truck was not there, which was expected. But Jennifer's car, a maroon Honda Accord, sat in its usual spot beneath the carport. Diane walked to the front door and knocked. No response. She tried the handle. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house was quiet, too quiet. The television in the living room was on, tuned to a morning talk show with the volume turned low. A basket of unfolded laundry sat on the couch. In the kitchen, a coffee mug rested in the dish drainer, still damp. The back door, which led to a small patio and the yard beyond, stood slightly ajar. Diane called her daughter's name. Nothing. She walked down the narrow hallway toward the bedrooms, her heart beginning to pound in a way she would later describe to investigators as primal, instinctive. Emma was in her crib, awake but not crying, staring up at the mobile of fabric butterflies that hung above her. The child was dry, unharmed, but she had clearly been alone for some time. Diane picked her up and searched the rest of the house. Jennifer's purse was on the kitchen counter. Her cell phone was plugged into the charger on the nightstand. Her shoes, the white sneakers she wore every day, were lined up neatly by the front door. The bed was made. There were no signs of struggle, no overturned furniture, no broken glass. Jennifer Thompson had simply ceased to exist within the walls of her own home. Diane Patterson dialed 911 at 11:28. The call was routed to the Carroll County Sheriff's Department. Deputy Marcus Riley arrived at the scene at 11:41. He was 29 years old, a lifelong resident of the county, and he had never worked a missing person case before. He walked through the house methodically, noting the unlocked doors, the undisturbed interior, the absence of any obvious crime scene. He radioed for backup and for his supervisor, Sergeant Thomas Caldwell, a grizzled veteran with 30 years on the force. By noon, the house was cordoned off. Christopher Thompson was contacted at the job site in Mackenzie. A coworker later told investigators that Christopher had seemed confused when told to come home, that he had asked twice whether something had happened to Emma. He arrived at County Road 170 at 12:50, his hands still dusted with drywall powder. Deputies watched as he parked his truck, climbed out, and approached the house with what one officer would later describe as measured steps. Not frantic, not running, measured. "Where's Jennifer?" he asked Sergeant Caldwell. "That's what we're trying to figure out, Mr. Thompson." Christopher stood on the front porch, looking past the officers into the house. He rubbed his face with both hands. "She was here this morning," he said. "She was right here." Deputies began canvassing the immediate area. They walked the property line, checked the outbuildings, searched the tree line at the edge of the yard. Neighbors were interviewed. No one had seen anything unusual. No one had heard shouting or a vehicle speeding away. The swing set creaked softly in the breeze. A child's plastic truck lay on its side near the porch steps, one wheel missing. By late afternoon, volunteer search teams were assembling at the volunteer fire department on Main Street. Maps were distributed. Grids were drawn. The woods surrounding County Road 170 stretched for miles in every direction. Part 2. The investigation. Within 24 hours, more than 100 volunteers had joined the search for Jennifer Thompson. They came from Huntingdon and beyond, from churches and civic organizations, from families who had known the Pattersons for generations. The Carroll County Sheriff's Department coordinated with the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Bloodhounds were brought in from Jackson. Helicopters swept low over the pine forests and tobacco fields, their rotors thumping in rhythm with the collective heartbeat of a community that could not comprehend how a young mother could vanish from a locked rural home in broad daylight. The search teams moved in formation through the woods, shoulder to shoulder, eyes scanning the ground for any sign of disturbance. They checked abandoned barns, empty grain silos, culverts beneath the back roads. Divers plunged into farm ponds and creek beds. The temperature climbed into the 80s. Volunteers wiped sweat from their faces and kept moving. Jennifer's photograph appeared on the evening news across West Tennessee. She looked young in the picture, smiling faintly, her dark hair pulled back in a ponytail. The hotline set up by the sheriff's department received dozens of calls, but none led anywhere substantive. Clear's throat. From the beginning, investigators focused their attention on the timeline. Christopher Thompson had left for work at 7:15. The job site supervisor in Mackenzie confirmed that Christopher had arrived at approximately 7:55, a drive time consistent with the distance. He had worked until shortly after noon when he received the call to return home. The postal carrier, Gerald Whitfield, had seen Jennifer alive at 8:45. That meant Jennifer had disappeared sometime between 8:45 and 11:15, a window of 2.5 hours. But there were discrepancies, small things, details that did not quite align. Christopher told investigators that he had kissed Jennifer goodbye in the kitchen at 7:15, yet the coffee mug in the dish drainer was still damp when Diane Patterson arrived at 11:15, more than 4 hours later. Had Jennifer washed that mug after Christopher left, or before? And if after, when? The television had been on when Diane arrived, tuned to a talk show that did not air until 10 o'clock. Had Jennifer turned it on, or had someone else? Deputies whispered quietly among themselves about Christopher's demeanor. He had not cried when told his wife was missing. He had not demanded to join the search parties. He had sat on the front porch of the house, smoking cigarettes, his expression blank. When Sergeant Caldwell asked him to describe Jennifer's mental state that morning, Christopher had shrugged. "She seemed fine," he said. "Normal." Was she upset about anything? Worried? No. Any arguments recently? No more than usual. Those who knew Christopher Thompson described him as a man of few words, stoic to the point of coldness. He had grown up in a household where emotion was weakness, where men did not speak of feelings or fears. But even accounting for personality, his lack of visible distress struck investigators as unusual. Sergeant Caldwell made a note in his case file. Subject appears detached. No visible signs of grief or concern. On the third day of the search, investigators obtained a warrant to search the Thompson residence more thoroughly. Forensic technicians from the TBI arrived with luminol, alternative light sources, and evidence collection kits. They sprayed the floors, the walls, the furniture. They found no blood. They swabbed surfaces for trace DNA. They examined the back door, which had been found ajar, for signs of forced entry. There were none. The door had been opened from the inside. They searched Christopher's truck. They found construction tools, fast food wrappers, a half-empty pack of cigarettes. The odometer showed that the vehicle had been driven approximately 43 miles on the day Jennifer disappeared, consistent with the round trip from County Road 170 to Mackenzie. They impounded the vehicle anyway and brought in cadaver dogs. The dogs showed no interest. Jennifer's cell phone records were subpoenaed. The last outgoing call had been made at 6:50 the previous evening to her mother, a conversation that lasted 4 minutes. There were no texts, no emails, no digital footprints that suggested where she might have gone or who she might have been in contact with. Her bank account showed no unusual activity. Her credit cards had not been used. Clears throat. As the days stretched into weeks, the focus of the investigation began to shift. Volunteers continued to search, but the initial urgency had faded. The media moved on to other stories. The hotline calls dwindled. Investigators interviewed friends and family members, building a profile of Jennifer's life. What emerged was a portrait of a woman who had been isolated, withdrawn, caught in the gravitational pull of a troubled marriage. Several of Jennifer's former coworkers from Dollar General told deputies that she had stopped coming to social gatherings months before her disappearance. One woman, Angela Morse, said that Jennifer had confided in her about arguments with Christopher, about money troubles, about feeling trapped. She said she wanted to leave, Angela told investigators, but she didn't know where she would go. Jennifer's sister, Rebecca Patterson, painted a similar picture. She told Sergeant Caldwell that Jennifer had called her in late March, less than 3 weeks before she disappeared, and said that Christopher had become increasingly controlling. He monitored her phone calls. He questioned her about where she went and who she spoke to. He had accused her without evidence of infidelity. She was scared, Rebecca said. She didn't say it outright, but I could hear it in her voice. When confronted with these allegations, Christopher denied them. "People are making things up," he said. "Jennifer and I had our problems, but what couple doesn't? I never hurt her. I never threatened her." Polygraph examinations are not admissible in court, but they are often used by investigators to narrow the field of suspects. Christopher Thompson agreed to take a polygraph on May 2, 2009, 18 days after Jennifer's disappearance. The examiner, a TBI specialist named Donald Kerr, asked a series of baseline questions and then moved to the specifics. "Did you harm Jennifer Thompson? Do you know where Jennifer Thompson is? Did you cause Jennifer Thompson to disappear?" Christopher answered no to each question. The results were inconclusive. His physiological responses showed signs of stress, but stress alone does not indicate deception. People react differently under examination. Some who are telling the truth show stress. Some who are lying remain calm. By summer, the investigation had stalled. There were no witnesses, no body, no physical evidence that a crime had even been committed. The prevailing theory among some investigators was that Jennifer had left voluntarily, perhaps fleeing an unhappy marriage. But this theory did not account for the absence of her purse, her phone, her shoes. It did not explain why she would leave her infant daughter behind. And it did not explain why no one had seen her or heard from her in the months since. Sergeant Caldwell refused to close the case, but he had no new leads to pursue. The file on Jennifer Leigh Thompson was placed in a cabinet at the Carroll County Sheriff's Department, marked as cold. The swing set in the yard on County Road 170 hung still. The toy truck remained on its side, its missing wheel never found. Part 3. The Silence. 6 months after Jennifer Thompson disappeared, Christopher moved out of the house on County Road 170. He took Emma with him and relocated to a rental property in the town of Camden, 40 miles east. Diane and Robert Patterson fought for custody of their granddaughter, but Tennessee law favored the surviving parent in the absence of evidence of wrongdoing. Christopher was granted full custody. The Pattersons were allowed supervised visitation every other weekend. Diane would later describe those visits as heartbreaking. Emma was too young to remember her mother, too young to understand why the woman in the photographs was not there. But as she grew older, she began to ask questions. "Where is Mommy?" she would say, her small voice cutting through the silence like a blade. Christopher's answer was always the same. She went away. For those who have ever doubted someone you love, who have felt the cold weight of suspicion settle in your chest and refused to give it voice, the years that followed Jennifer's disappearance were a study in quiet anguish. Diane Patterson believed in her heart that Christopher Thompson knew more than he was saying. She believed that he had harmed her daughter, but belief is not proof, and without proof, there was nothing she could do but wait and watch and hope that the truth would eventually surface. The marriage between Christopher and his second wife, a woman named Amanda Ritchie whom he met in 2011, lasted less than 2 years. Amanda would later tell investigators that Christopher had nightmares, that he would wake in the middle of the night drenched in sweat, muttering words she could not make out. She said he kept the house locked at all times, that he forbade her from answering the door when someone knocked. When she asked him about Jennifer, he would shut down completely, retreating into silence or anger. "He told me once that people didn't understand what it was like to lose someone," Amanda said in a deposition taken in 2013. He said the whole town blamed him for something he didn't do, but there were times when he would get this look in his eyes like he was somewhere else, remembering something. "It scared me." They separated in the fall of 2013. Amanda filed for restraint based on what she described as erratic and controlling behavior. Christopher did not contest the filing. He moved again, this time to a trailer park on the outskirts of Paris, Tennessee. Emma, now 5 years old, started kindergarten. Teachers noticed that she was quieter than other children, that she preferred to play alone. In the summer of 2015, Emma began drawing pictures in art class. Most were unremarkable, the kind of images any child might create. Houses with smoke curling from chimneys, stick-figure families holding hands. But one drawing caught the attention of her teacher, a woman named Linda Garrett who had worked in the school system for 20 years. The drawing showed a woman lying on the ground, her arms outstretched, surrounded by trees. Above the figure, Emma had written in careful block letters, "Mommy sleeping." Linda Garrett showed the drawing to the school counselor, who contacted the Department of Children's Services. A caseworker named Rachel Benton was assigned to interview Emma. The interview took place on August 19, 2015, in a small room at the Carroll County Child Advocacy Center. Rachel Benton was trained in forensic interviewing techniques designed to elicit information from children without leading them or planting suggestions. The interview was recorded. In it, Emma Thompson, now 7 years old, sat at a table with crayons and paper, her legs swinging beneath the chair. "Emma," Rachel Benton said gently, "can you tell me about the picture you drew at school?" Emma nodded. "It's Mommy." "Where is Mommy in the picture?" "In the woods." "How do you know Mommy is in the woods?" Emma hesitated. She picked up a crayon and began to color. "Daddy told me." Clears throat. Rachel Benton leaned forward slightly. "When did Daddy tell you that?" "A long time ago, when I was little." "What did Daddy say?" Emma's hand stilled. She looked up, her blue eyes wide and uncertain. "He said Mommy went asleep in the woods and she's not coming back." The interview lasted 40 minutes. Emma's statements were fragmentary, the memories of a child trying to piece together things she had been told and things she might have seen. She said she remembered a night when she was very small, when her father had carried her to the truck and driven somewhere. She remembered trees. She remembered her father telling her to stay in the truck, that he had to take care of something. She could not say when this had happened or where they had gone, only that it was dark and that she had been frightened. The recording was forwarded to the Tennessee Bureau of Investigation. Agent Sarah Connolly, who had worked the original case in 2009, reviewed the material and reopened the investigation. The case was no longer cold. It was active. Part 4, The Revelation. On September 10, 2015, agents from the TBI, accompanied by deputies from the Carroll County Sheriff's Department, executed a search warrant at Christopher Thompson's residence in Paris, Tennessee. Christopher was at work. Emma was at school. The trailer was small, cluttered, the air inside stale. Investigators seized computers, cell phones, financial records, and personal documents. They searched the property surrounding the trailer, using ground-penetrating radar to scan for anomalies in the soil. They found nothing. But the investigation was far from over. Agents interviewed Emma's teachers, her babysitters, anyone who had been in contact with the child. They re-interviewed Christopher's former wife, Amanda Ritchie, and obtained access to text messages and emails from the period of their marriage. They built a timeline of Christopher's movements in the weeks and months after Jennifer's disappearance, cross-referencing cell phone tower data with known locations. Clears throat. In October 2015, a hunter named Carl Simmons was walking his property in the Natchez Trace State Forest, some 15 miles southeast of Huntingdon, when his dog began digging frantically at the base of a rotted oak tree. Carl pulled the dog back and saw what appeared to be fabric protruding from the soil. He called the sheriff's department. deputies arrived and cordoned off the area. Forensic anthropologists from the University of Tennessee were brought in to excavate the site. What they found, buried in a shallow grave beneath layers of leaf litter and sediment, were the skeletal remains of a human female. The body had been wrapped in a blue tarp and secured with duct tape. Clothing fragments matched the description of what Jennifer Thompson had been wearing on the day she disappeared: a gray t-shirt and blue jeans. Dental records confirmed the identity. Jennifer Leigh Thompson had been found. The cause of death could not be determined due to the state of decomposition, but the manner of burial suggested homicide. The location of the grave, deep in a remote section of the forest accessible only by logging roads, indicated that the person who buried her had knowledge of the area and had taken deliberate steps to conceal the body. On November 3, 2015, Christopher Dale Thompson was arrested at his place of employment and charged with first-degree murder in the death of his wife, Jennifer Leigh Thompson. He was read his rights and transported to the Carroll County Jail. His bail was set at $1 million. He did not speak during the booking process. He did not ask for a lawyer. He sat in the holding cell, staring at the wall, his expression as blank as it had been 6 years earlier when he stood on the porch of the house on County Road 170 and told Sergeant Caldwell, "She was right here." The arrest sent shockwaves through the community. For some, it was vindication, the confirmation of suspicions they had harbored for years. For others, it was disbelief. Christopher Thompson had lived among them, had worked beside them, had raised his daughter in their schools. How could they have missed the signs? How could they have let a man they now believed to be responsible for such an act move freely among them for so long? The trial began on March 14, 2016, in the Circuit Court of Carroll County. The prosecution, led by District Attorney Michael Stanton, presented a case built on circumstantial evidence, witness testimony, and the statements of Emma Thompson. They argued that Christopher had ended Jennifer's life in the early morning hours of April 14, 2009, likely in the home they shared, and had transported her body to the Natchez Trace State Forest where he buried her in a pre-dug grave. They argued that he had returned to the house, cleaned up any evidence, and then driven to work as if nothing had happened. The defense, led by attorney Karen Hollies, argued that the prosecution's case was based on speculation and the unreliable memories of a traumatized child. They pointed out that there was no physical evidence linking Christopher to the grave site, no witnesses who had seen him in the forest, no forensic proof that Jennifer had been harmed in the home. They argued that Emma's statements were the product of suggestion, that she had been influenced by years of hearing adults speculate about her mother's fate. Clear's throat. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Witnesses included Diane Patterson, who testified about her daughter's troubled marriage and her belief that Christopher was responsible. Angela Morse, Jennifer's former co-worker, testified about the conversation she had with Jennifer in the weeks before her disappearance. Amanda Ritchie, Christopher's second wife, testified about the nightmares and the locked doors and the fear she had felt living with him. The most damning testimony came from the forensic experts. A soil analyst testified that samples taken from the grave site matched soil found on a shovel seized from Christopher's trailer. A cell phone analyst testified that Christopher's phone had pinged off a tower near the Natchez Trace State Forest on the evening of April 13, 2009, the night before Jennifer was reported missing. Christopher had claimed he was home that evening watching television with Jennifer. The cell phone data contradicted his statement. Emma Thompson did not testify in person. She was deemed too young to withstand the pressure of cross-examination. Instead, the recording of her interview with Rachel Benton was played for the jury. In the darkened courtroom, the sound of Emma's small voice describing her father's words, "Mommy went to sleep in the woods and she's not coming back," hung in the air like a ghost. On April 5, 2016, after 14 hours of deliberation, the jury returned a verdict of guilty on the charge of first-degree murder. Christopher Dale Thompson was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. He showed no emotion as the verdict was read. He was led from the courtroom in handcuffs, his eyes fixed on the floor. Emma Thompson was placed in the permanent custody of her maternal grandparents, Diane and Robert Patterson. The house on County Road 170 was sold. The swing set was dismantled. The woods where Jennifer's body had been found were marked with a small plaque placed there by her family that read simply, "Jennifer Leigh Thompson, 1985-2009. Beloved daughter, sister, mother." Closing. The case of Jennifer Thompson is a reminder that justice does not always arrive quickly, but it can arrive. It is a reminder that the truth, no matter how deeply buried, has a way of surfacing when those who seek it refuse to give up. Jennifer was a young woman whose life was taken from her in the quiet hours of an April morning, whose body was hidden in the earth for more than 6 years, whose voice was silenced but whose memory endured. Her daughter, Emma, carries that memory now. She carries the weight of what was lost and the hope of what was found. And in the end, perhaps that is what justice looks like. Not the erasure of grief, but the refusal to let it be forgotten. If this story mattered to you, subscribe and hit the bell. Share the episode. Someone somewhere may still be waiting to be heard.